Hello, everyone, and welcome to Functionally Enlightened. I'm your host, Sharon Surita, and today we have special guest, Dr. Adrienne Youdim. She's a physician, an author, a TEDx speaker specializing in medical weight loss and nutrition. Her mission is to empower people to adopt scientifically backed mind-body techniques to enhance greater mental, emotional, and physical health and well-being. She holds multiple board certifications awarded by the American Board of Internal Medicine, the National Board of Physician Nutrition Specialists, the American Board of Obesity Medicine, and is a fellow of the American College of Physicians. Her most recent book, Hungry for More: Stories and Science to Inspire Weight Loss from the Inside Out, explores the emotional and spiritual hungers that present as a hunger for food. Dr. Youdim currently sees patients in her private practice in Beverly Hills, and she also hosts the Health Bite podcast, ranked amongst the top 3% most listened to globally. Dr. Youdim is a national speaker sought after by the media and has been featured on The Doctors, Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, ABC News, Inside Edition, National Public Radio, among other news outlets. Dr. Youdim lives in Los Angeles with her high school sweetheart, 3 kids, and a Labradoodle. In her spare time, she can be found running, reading, and gathered around a home-cooked meal with family and friends. You can view her TEDx talk, which we'll have posted in the show notes. And we're also going to have a couple other links, but we'll talk about that a little more. So I would like to, again, welcome Dr. Youdim. We're so excited to speak with you.
Thank you, Sharon. It's so nice to be here with you.
I know your schedule is so packed, so we truly do appreciate. And we want to hear about so many things. First off, your primary area of expertise and how you've developed a protocol, written a book. So if you could kind of dive into that a little bit for us.
Of course. So I am an internist and I specialize in nutrition and obesity medicine. And my clinical practice is primarily people coming in wanting guidance on healthy diet and a lot of focus on weight loss and medical weight loss. My creative work, though, is really around the emotional and spiritual hungers that lead us to soothe with food or anything else that we choose, any dopamine hit of choice, whether it's smoking or drinking or overworking. And I'm really passionate about this because, Sharon, these are universal themes, right? Like we are all susceptible to that desire or wanting to soothe whoever we are, wherever we are. And so I love the universality of the message.
Right. So you have what you consider the 5 pillars of good nutrition. Can you elaborate on that and really let the audience know how, if we have more broad perspective on nutrition, that actually might benefit us more?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you asked because when people come and ask me to talk about nutrition, they're usually thinking about, diets, keto or intermittent fasting or macros or supplements. And I've really found in working with patients for the last almost 20 years that we have such a narrow view of nutrition because nutrition is so much more than the food that we eat. I like to say that food is also, or nutrition rather, is also the company that we keep, the words that we use towards ourselves, whether or not we engage in movement or nature or rest and play. So my 5 pillars or nutrients are food, movement, sleep, nature, and the practices that help bring about a sense of pause or spiritual or contemplative practices. And the science, as you probably know as well, is clear that these 5 nutrients are incredibly important in terms of our physical, mental, and emotional health. They are the same nutrients that ancient wisdom has taught us for emotional regulation. And in my corporate work, I found it is also the very same things that help us be impactful leaders in the workplace.
Absolutely. And you mentioned movement. So in my practice, we work with a lot of people who are disabled or have very limited mobility. So in your viewpoint, how can we incorporate movement as part of your pillars of health success?
Yes. So I like to say movement and not exercise, because I think exercise is alienating, maybe to people who are, physically challenged. I also think that we all associate exercise with weight loss, which really gives it a bad rap and also makes it untenable, I think, for some people when they think about it in terms of weight. But we know that movement is so critical to, again, all of those various aspects of health that I mentioned. And we also know that the body is so forgiving. So you don't have to run a marathon or get a gym membership and, lift weights or whatever the case may be in order to reap the benefits of movement. And I tell people, wherever they are in their fitness kind of journey, to just meet themselves where they're at, wherever that may be. So, for example, if it's somebody who is overweight with severe osteoarthritis and joint pain and can't walk for more than a few minutes, well, then you can walk a few minutes, but multiple times a day. And they've shown that that is additive. So the benefits of that short bursts of activity are additive. And so it really is something that is accessible. If you're wheelchair bound, there are upper body movements that you can do, develop your upper body strength. If you're a 60-hour-a-week worker in a sedentary job, there's something called exercise snacks, 5-minute snacks that they've shown helps people preserve their muscle mass, which is an issue for people who live sedentary lifestyles. So again, there's so many ways to bring about a movement practice that doesn't have to be pristine, and yet it can be very effective.
Yeah, I love that. If they're movement snacks, I'm gonna use that term.
Yes, because we all love snacks, Sharon.
And then it gives it that perspective that it's a bite-sized thing. So, and when we talk about nature, I know you focus a lot about getting out in nature. So maybe incorporating those two things together, the movement outside, making sure you're getting exposed to daylight. And what are the other things you recommend in terms of, or why is it beneficial for people to get outside more often?
Yes, and I love that you brought that up, because, and it kind of makes me think of something called habit stacking, which means that, if you have a few things that you want to get done, or maybe there's a new habit that you want to evoke, you are more likely to do it if you stack it with something else that you're already doing. So let's say you like being out in nature, but you're intimidated by doing exercise. You can stack them together and kind of kill two birds with one stone. I love the science of nature. So the wisdom is, what the hypothesis is, that our ancestors evolved to take cues from the natural world in order to survive. And so we have learned and we have evolved as a result of that to also have this kind of harmony with nature. And the truth is that the sights of trees or mountainous ranges, the smell of plants, the sound of streams, these all stimulate the parasympathetic or rest and relax part of your nervous system. So we can literally achieve emotional regulation by being out in nature. And there's a fun study. Can I share with you?
Absolutely.
They actually did this study where they took a group of people and they put them in a movie theater and they showed them a frightening movie like Nightmare on Elm Street. So got them all revved up, heart rate up, right? Blood pressure up. And then they divided them into two groups. One group was given a second video of urban settings, so like city life. And then the second group was given a video of nature. And then they went back and they measured these people's heart rate, respirations, skin temperature, all these various physiologic parameters of the sympathetic nervous system. And they found that those that were in the nature group just merely viewing nature, right? So they didn't even have to be in nature, just seeing a video of nature brought down these parameters much more consistently than the people who were given a video of the city life. So it really demonstrates, like, wow, how powerful and impactful it can be to merely view sights of nature.
Yeah, I can imagine. And a lot of us are guilty of, watching late night movies or TV shows that are probably not very soothing and calming. So we're doing this at the time where we should be prepping for bedtime, getting in sync with our circadian rhythm and making sure, 8, 9 o'clock, we're supposed to be in that soothe mode, but we're not. And I can imagine the same scenario if we were to measure. I'm going to actually do that at home because I'm the one who goes to bed early. I'm the one who meditates before bed, but the rest of the family probably is playing video games and whatnot. So I'm gonna do the measurements and see what kind of results we get here.
Yeah, I'm sure you're gonna find that you're in good stead. And it's not just TV, but our phones. I would venture to say that 99% of your listeners, at least 90, and I'll include myself in that, tends to look at their phone or a screen, if not immediately before bed, at least within the 30 or 60 minutes before bed, and talk about stimulating, right? Our social media is stimulating, our news feeds are stimulating, the light on the screen is stimulating. So, when we talk about sleep being another pillar, being able to, create some boundaries around the screen time, which is really difficult. I mean, it's very difficult for me, Sharon. I don't know how you feel, but it's really difficult to put that phone down and have the discipline to set those boundaries. But it does impact your nervous system, and therefore it impacts your ability to create an environment that's conducive for sleep.
Yeah, and what you mentioned is so key because we have these mobile devices pretty much attached to us at all times. I'm guilty of having it at my desk when I'm doing other work, and you hear the bing. So I mute my phone, but then there's the vibration, and that's still distracting in itself. So even just that aspect of it, the ability to focus on one task at a time, it just contributes to that stress. So, or I'll say the inability to focus on that one activity. So
Yes.
I know for myself, I do put my phone on airplane mode at night and, I'll play a meditation. I like Brain Tap app. I'm not sure if you're aware of that one,
I
but you
don't
can
know that one.
you can load the program and still put it on airplane mode and it'll just play the downloaded. It's a meditative practice. So wonderful for people who need a little bit of assistance to get into that sleep mode.
Mm.
So what are some other things that you would recommend people do to capitalize on that sleep pillar?
So, insomnia is really common. I think the most recent statistics I saw was that 30% of Americans reported to have insomnia. And there's certainly organic causes for insomnia. Perimenopause is a big one. But I also think that many of us are not doing the things that allow us to be prepared for sleep, right? We're not creating that environment that is conducive to sleep. So some of the things that I talk about, caffeine, that can impact the receptors that are involved in inducing sleep for up to 12 hours. So I'm a huge coffee drinker, but I've given up that habit of an afternoon coffee, really limiting it to the morning. The second is alcohol. Alcohol is something that people may associate with sleep because it's initially sedating. But again, when we think about the brain and what the function and mission of the brain is to keep us alive, the brain knows that being sleepy is not conducive to being alive or to detecting threat. So when we take something like alcohol that sedates us, there are counter-regulatory hormones or neurotransmitters that are later released that are stimulating, that awaken us, which is why, regular drinkers may notice that if they drink, they fall asleep quickly, but then they're woken several hours later. That is a function of those counter-regulatory neurotransmitters. So alcohol, caffeine, and then doing something that is soothing, right? So instead of the TV or instead of the phone or working, a lot of people take their second shift of work on their laptop, trying to find a practice like meditation, as you suggested, like a breathing practice, reading in a book, writing in a journal, or just taking a bubble bath, or just a bath or a hot shower, right? Anything that will kind of bring us down and create this kind of internal environment of rest. And I wonder if we all did that, what the numbers would be, what the statistics would look like for insomnia. And I would guess that we would be in better stead, that many people who are finding themselves having difficulty sleeping or awakening in the middle of the night would find that with these practices, they have more sound sleep.
Absolutely. And then being consistent with those practices for sure.
Yes.
Some of the things that I often recommend are changing out light bulbs in the room to red light bulbs and turning off technology, making sure you unplug TVs. And for those people who do have electric, what do you call them, like adjustable beds of some kind, you have to be mindful that that is a stressor on the body too. But you kind of have to outweigh or weigh out the risks. Like, is the EMF exposure more of a problem, or is your comfort the issue? Like, you need to have the adjustable bed for your own comfort and ability to move around. So those are just a few more things that I look at. But going back to the alcohol component, I know also when we eat later at night, we have to be mindful of what we're eating because it can also cause like that blood sugar spike while we're sleeping. Can you tell us, the audience, like what kinds of things should we be avoiding before bed or at dinner time even?
Yeah, I mean, I would say even a matter of timing, right? Because if we eat within hours of sleep, right, our gut is still has that food, and it hasn't been digested. So reflux is a very common problem, and so that can definitely interfere with people's sleep. So the first thing I would say is just being mindful of having an end time to eating and having that be a hard stop, at least 2 hours before bedtime, but preferably 3. And then I recommend protein with every meal, and that would go for dinner as well. And protein is, I like to say, our body's own Ozempic, because it is the macronutrient that stimulates that gut hormone that is a analog in that drug, but the gut hormone that we all naturally release when we eat food that tells our brain we're full. So having protein is going to help satiate you so that you don't get hungry again before bedtime. Or, there are people who wake up from their sleep and find themselves wanting to eat something. So protein is very important. And then to your point, I don't vilify carbs. We vilify carbs in this society, but not all carbs are the same. And your processed carbs or sugars, yes, are going to give you a big rise in blood sugar quickly, because think about it, when something is processed, it means it's kind of digested already. That's the way I like to look at it. So the body doesn't have to work hard in order to absorb that sugar, and therefore the blood sugar goes up precipitously. And then the pancreas is like, holy cow, that's a lot of sugar, and will dump a bunch of insulin to manage that sugar. And then you get that crash, the sugar crash, where you're irritable and out of sorts. So what I recommend for carbs is the good carbs, the complex carbs, the ones that give you a slow rise and fall of energy. Because again, you don't want your body going into these extremes, metabolic extremes. You want your body to have kind of a steady state, a balance that allows, again, for it to be conducive to more sound sleeping.
Yeah. So when we look at those carbs, I like to think about the leafy greens and the cruciferous vegetables, but also I am more mindful now that there's people out there that suffer with the condition mast cell activation. So I am always cautious about like stating definitely incorporate these vegetables in because they probably know better than anyone else because they've already experienced reactions. But those sometimes I look at these foods that are high oxalate, but they're superfoods, and there's that discrepancy there. So what how do you work around people who have these sensitivities or intolerances to certain kinds of or categories of food?
Well, I would say again, there's so much available to us. And the body doesn't really care about so many of the things that the mind cares about. We tend to call things superfoods, or we tend to insist on like the veggie, the famous veggie of the week, like kale, for example. I don't know what it is right now, but kale just comes to mind. It's
Hmm.
an oldie but goodie. But the reality is there's so much abundance out there. So find what works for you, find what you enjoy, and what works for your body, and know that there's a lot of opportunity. We don't need to be so prescribed in our eating, and we don't need to be perfect in order to be effective in these pursuits. So a lot of times that desire to be perfect, or the idea that they need to be perfect, really gets us out of the game. It prevents us from even trying. And so what I would say is just be mindful of what you really enjoy, what feels good in your body, and do that thing, and the body will respond.
Yeah, so that kind of leads into your text, the book that you recently, well, what year was that published?
It's been, I guess, 2 years, 2022 now.
Okay, so I would still call it very recent. Hungry for More. Can you tell the audience what to expect when they pick up that book or maybe the PDF that they can download?
Yes. So, Hungry for More it came out of this realization that while we have physical hunger, our hungers also represent our spiritual and our emotional needs. And the idea came to me through my patients. While I was trying to suppress their hunger with medications to help them lose weight, I recognized that there was this other hunger in the room, and that this hunger was not meant to be suppressed, but rather leaned into. So, for example, somebody who is in a deadbeat job, right? Not doing something that's fulfilling or satisfying, or they feel like they're not valued or respected in their workplace or contributing. That leaves us with a hunger, right? For purpose, for meaning. And in the absence of that, believe it or not, those difficult emotions that are elicited when we have these unmet needs literally increase our physiologic hunger hormones. Stress and emotional discomfort increase our hunger hormones. So there's this link that's very concrete between emotional hunger and the desire to eat or soothe with food. What my position is, instead of soothing those hungers, and certainly instead of shaming the fact that we have these hungers, lean into it. Use it as an opportunity to identify what it is that you're hungry for. What is that unmet need? Maybe it is to find a job that is purposeful. Maybe it is seeking more connection in your life. Maybe it's surrounding yourself with like-minded friends and people. So again, we can use these hungers to really identify what it is that we need, and then give ourselves that unmet need, fulfill that unmet need.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I know you also have a mini course out there that's dedicated to journaling and the practice of, being mindful of even maybe what you were just speaking on trying to figure out what the purpose is in their lives, what fulfills them. Can you talk to us about what that practice looks like to you and how they can potentially do this on their own?
Yes, of course. Well, I talk about in the book, in the chapter Hungry for Belonging, I share how I used food as a child to soothe my desire to belong. And being a child of immigrants, I didn't look like my peers in the classroom. And at that time, I was in third grade. My teacher gave me a spiral notebook, Miss Lusky, and she told me, she made me promise that I would write in that notebook every single day. And that started a journaling practice that I have kept to this day, over 40 years, and I'm still journaling. Journaling is a really beautiful, therapeutic, and science-based way to manage difficult thoughts and emotions, to limit ruminations, which, by the way, is a major reason we can't sleep at night, right? When we're like rehashing the events of the day over and over and over again. And it's been shown to reduce anxiety and depression, as well as, believe it or not, has been shown to improve certain inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. I mean, it's crazy to think that you could just journal your way into taking less Advil for rheumatoid arthritis, but it's true. So the journaling course is really based on my own personal experience of healing through writing. And it offers 30 prompts that people can do daily or even weekly to help them uncover their hunger. And while we may associate that with weight, it really is a pathway to self-awareness. And that really has nothing to do with the numbers on the scale.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that the journaling piece is one that is difficult for people to incorporate again daily because it's not something you see immediate benefits from. But as you mentioned, over time, there's definitely a change in neurotransmitter processes, even in the mind. And there's that, I think it's Sarno's mind-body connection. I can't remember the exact title of his book, but where journaling and also acknowledging where we're at right then and acknowledging that the pain exists, whether it be a physical or emotional pain, but then kind of going through it and allowing ourselves to feel it without shame. So those things are part of this journaling. We shouldn't shy away from everything that we're experiencing, but to accept it and then to also look at the things to be grateful for, trying to find any little things. And in my own chronic illness journey, it was very difficult because our brains kind of shut down and we're not able to really see the world for what it is or what it could be. We're just kind of stuck in our own bubble of pain and chronic illness. So for clients or patients of yours that are really in a tight spot, how can you help them overcome that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because you're right, writing can be very deep and intense, and it can bring about difficult emotions. What I would say is to use it initially very concretely. And I love the idea of a brain dump, which is what I was alluding to before. Just using the journal as a way to kind of dump the contents of your head before sleep. And I think people will find immediacy in that in terms of benefit, because it helps when you have all this thoughts swirling in your head to just put it somewhere else for safekeeping. But what I tell my patients is that if you agree to do the brain dump, set a timer for maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever the case may be. But then you have to have a contract with yourself that once that timer goes off, that brain dump is now there. And so you promise that you give your brain a rest until the next day when you can go back to it. And I think having a physical place to hold those thoughts is one of the ways in which it helps clear our head and prevent ruminations at nighttime. So I would say that is a very concrete way of doing it. And then when you feel safe, you can dig in and explore a little bit more the nuances of what you've dumped in your head, and use a healthcare provider. So oftentimes I'll tell my patients, here's a prompt, share it with your therapist, and or share it with your life coach, or whatever the case may be. Share it with a friend that you are comfortable with, and let them help you process. It can be very healing, particularly because I think when we are vulnerable in that way, we realize, again, how universal our concerns are. We may feel like we are the only ones that are burdened by a certain thing. And it is through sharing it with others that we realize, oh, wow, it isn't just me. This is a universal concern. And that in and of itself can be extremely therapeutic.
Right, right. The understanding you're not alone and that you couldn't be part of a community, even when homebound. Like now we're blessed with the virtual world. Although it's not the same as physical touch and physical presence, we have the ability, like you and I are talking right now. That's something to be mindful of, and to look for supportive organizations, or some of the support groups that we find out there aren't really as uplifting as others. So just trying to be selective in what to immerse yourself in. That's
Yes.
definitely at the forefront. So we talked a little bit about some of the pillars that you focus on. We talked about mindfulness and movement. We talked a little bit about the diet. What are the other ones that you would like for our audience to really learn from?
So I guess the last one, which is pause, I think is really important. If when we're talking about hunger, or we're talking about any other form of reactivity or autopilot, again, our nervous system and our brains have evolved to be reactive, to respond to a threat quickly so that we don't get consumed by the tiger, right? But the reality is that the stresses that we deal with right now they're not like being out in the wild, and protecting yourself against predators. And yet we respond to them in the same reactive way. And, we can just use the example of what's going on in the world around us and in our own country and on our campuses. There is so much reactivity. And when we can cultivate a practice of pause, whether it is a breathing practice, meditation, journaling, yoga, or Tai Chi, basically any practice that forces us to slow down, right? Being in nature, it allows us to create space between the trigger and the reaction, so that we can be mindful, we can be discerning about the next step. And you can apply this again to world affairs. You could apply this to your hunger, right? Like if you're in bed watching TV and all of a sudden you get this idea to run down into the pantry and grab a bag of chips, but you're not hungry, right? If we do that enough, we're on autopilot. We don't even have to think about it. We just find ourselves like, oh my God, look at me, I'm in the pantry. But if we can create pause between the trigger and the habitual response, we can ask ourselves, what is it that we're hungry for? Maybe it's late at night and we just need to shut off the light and go to sleep, right? Maybe we look and see that our partner is asleep and it dawns on us that we haven't had a decent conversation with our partner and we're really hungry for connection. So, and there are umpteen others, many of which I describe in the book. And I'm sure some that come to mind for your listeners as they're listening. But again, being able to create that space allows us to really act with intention, as opposed to acting with reactivity and out of autopilot.
Yeah, very good. And I'm thinking even just today, as a mid-afternoon, sometimes, we could be craving a little bit of a caffeine fix. I've cut out caffeine, but I still crave the decaf coffee. I like the flavor. And then I know that I'm going to add a fat in there, a healthy fat, coconut milk, but still, am I really hungry? No. Am I really thirsty? No, it's just a mindset thing that is maybe wanting to distract me from work and let me unplug. So instead, maybe I can just use that time to step outside for a couple minutes, ground my feet, get some sunlight exposure again, and just all those things that are actually good for our hormones and getting us ready. Because we should be looking at sunlight, not directly sunlight, but we should be being exposed to natural light so that we can get into sync with sunrise and sunset. So yeah, I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent with that one, but I was just reminding myself that I didn't necessarily need a snack midday or mid-afternoon.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I would say, it's something that we all do. And so it's not a matter of feeling bad about it or shaming ourselves for it. It's more a matter of recognizing that it doesn't really even scratch the itch. So if we don't distract or if we aren't reactive, then we can spend some time to really discern what it is that we do want, what would scratch the itch.
Mhm.
And that's how I would invite people to look at it, not from a place of, blame or self-deprecation, but from a place of potential and opportunity.
Love that. Again, so many good tips that you provided. Is there anything else that you generally would recommend to all of your clients that they could do on a daily practice?
Well, I would just say, rather than making a strict recommendation, I would just say, think about all the things that we talked about today. Think about the 5 pillars or key nutrients. Think about some of the examples that we gave for good sleep or movement, right? And pick one thing that you're excited about and want to incorporate, and work on that one thing without, overwhelming yourself with all the things that you wish to accomplish, and celebrate that win. Once you have accomplished it and have implemented it in your life, give yourself a tap on the back and celebrate that win, because these small steps, when done consistently, can have really profound impact in our lives.
Yes, wonderful. And Dr. Youdim, if people want to find out more about your practice or definitely get your book, or even learn about the courses that you offer, how can they reach out?
Yes, so dradrienneyoudim.com is my website. I do have a weekly newsletter where I muse about these things, as well as a weekly podcast called Health Bite. And other resources like the book and the course are also there. But starting with the newsletter, I think, is a great way to just stay connected and, again, get little reminders. As I write them and remind you, I'm also reminding myself. So
Yes.
we're all in it together.
I love that you practice everything that you're teaching. That's wonderful.
We try.
Yeah, yeah. So again, we thank you for your time. We'll definitely have all of that information linked in our show notes for all of our audience. And just thank you again from the bottom of our
It was a pleasure to be with you here, Sharon. Thank you so much.
thank you. And thank you to our listeners. Take care.